The underwear fell to the floor, and Lucas instinctively bent down to pick it up. In that moment, something horrifying happened. Lucas brought the panties to his nose and sniffed. I froze, utterly shocked, witnessing the entire scene. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I couldn't believe my eyes. The image of Lucas sniffing my underwear played in slow motion in my mind, leaving an indelible mark. I felt disgusted, enraged, and above all, profoundly violated. "Lucas!" I roared, my voice trembling with anger. You're a pervert!" When I close my eyes, I see how dramatically my life has changed. I had become the second wife of Michael, a respected, experienced, and mature man. This luxurious house was now my new home, but the thing that worried me most was Lucas, Michael's son from his previous marriage. Lucas was an 18-year-old young man, quiet, reserved, and somewhat withdrawn. From the very first days of living together, I noticed that he kept his distance from me. It made me feel uneasy. I wondered if I was intruding on his personal space. To Lucas, I wasn't just a newcomer to the family. I was probably an outsider invading the world he had always known. Michael was frequently busy with work, often away from home for weeks at a time. I knew I had to take on the role of keeping the family together, but dealing with Lucas was no easy task. Our conversations were always brief, revolving around mundane household matters. Lucas didn't seem particularly interested in my presence. I still remember my first encounter with Lucas. It was an afternoon when Michael was showing me around the house. When we reached Lucas's room, Michael knocked on the door, but there was no response. After a brief hesitation, Michael opened the door. Lucas was sitting in front of his computer screen, immersed in a game I couldn't recognize. The glow from the screen illuminated his face, giving him a cold and distant look. "Lucas, this is Lily, my wife," Michael said. Lucas turned his head, gave me a quick, indifferent nod, and immediately resumed his game. I tried to smile warmly, but my smile was swallowed up by the icy atmosphere in the room. I felt like an unwelcome guest. His gaze wasn't just cold, but carried a hint of defiance. At that moment, I told myself it wasn't hatred, but perhaps just unfamiliarity and the guardedness of a young man. I realized what lay ahead. There would be no warm welcome, no friendly smiles. Lucas was used to being alone in his own world. If I wanted to break through this barrier, I would need patience and perhaps a bit of tact. From the moment I moved in, I felt the house was well-equipped but devoid of life. Everything was meticulously arranged, but it exuded a sense of coldness. Michael had optimized the house with the latest electronics, but he had neglected to make it feel like a true home for Lucas. I noticed this right away, even in the fridge stocked with pre-packaged meals. Lucas didn't seem to care much about family dinners. He often grabbed quick meals and retreated to his room, spending endless hours in front of his computer. Many times, I prepared elaborate meals, pouring my heart into each dish, hoping these dinners would bring the three of us closer. But Lucas remained distant. He sat through meals in silence, quickly finishing his food and returning to his own world. Once I left a note on the dining table, writing simple messages like, "I hope you enjoy this meal," or, "Lucas, if there's anything you like, just let me know." But the notes always stayed untouched, with no response. It felt like I was trying to communicate with a ghost rather than a flesh-and-blood teenager. I recall one particularly awkward moment with Lucas. I was folding laundry in the living room when he walked by and accidentally caught sight of me, struggling with a shirt that had gotten twisted. His eyes lingered for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly in a quick glance. Without a word, he turned away, his face turning a deep shade of red. A wave of awkwardness washed over me. I wondered if he was uncomfortable with my presence, but I knew I couldn't back down. I believed that behind his cold exterior was a soul longing for connection. I decided that no matter how challenging it would be, I would continue my small efforts, step by step, to bridge the gap between us. And then, that fateful moment came. What seemed like an ordinary occurrence turned into a turning point, altering our lives forever. The story began with what seemed like an ordinary request on an otherwise uneventful day. That afternoon, I was tidying up the bathroom after my shower when I noticed the laundry basket was overflowing. Michael wasn't home, and I was juggling a dozen other chores. In a moment of decision, I thought of Lucas. He was at home, and this seemed like a good opportunity to ask for his help with some housework. Hesitating slightly, I knocked gently on his door. "Lucas, can you help me with something?" I called out. The door creaked open. Lucas, with his tousled hair and eyes still glued to the computer screen, looked at me with mild confusion. "What is it?" "The laundry basket in the bathroom. Could you carry it down to the washer for me?" I smiled at him. Lucas frowned slightly, likely annoyed at being interrupted, but eventually nodded. "Sure." He stepped into the bathroom, grabbed the bag, and headed downstairs. I went back to my tasks, silently grateful for his help. But only a few minutes later, I heard hurried footsteps and Lucas's panicked voice shouting from the laundry room. "Miss Lily, what is this?" My heart skipped a beat. I rushed downstairs to find Lucas holding something in his hand. My breath hitched as I immediately recognized it, a pair of my underwear. Stained red from my menstrual cycle, the marks were all too visible. "Lucas!" I shouted, my face flushing red. "What are you doing? Give that to me now!" But Lucas didn't hand it back. Instead, he stared at it, his face a mix of curiosity and confusion. "What is this? Are you okay?" Lucas pointed at the stains on the fabric. I felt mortified beyond words. A wave of embarrassment coursed through me, freezing my body in place. My mind went blank as the room seemed to fall into silence. My face turned pale, and frantic thoughts swirled in my head. I snatched the underwear from his hand, trying to hide my humiliation behind a stern tone. "Lucas, this is none of your business." But Lucas wasn't done. He looked at me with a puzzled expression, his brow furrowed slightly. "Miss Lily, I didn't mean anything bad, but this looks weird. I've never seen something like this before." He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the underwear I now clutched tightly. Are you hurt?" His words, though still embarrassing, took the edge off my anger. I realized he was just curious and perhaps concerned. Part of me even wondered if I was overlooking something significant. After all, those stains weren't exactly typical. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "It's nothing, Lucas. Just a women's thing." I kept my explanation vague, hoping he'd drop the subject, but Lucas didn't look convinced. "But it doesn't seem like the usual thing," he said quietly, his voice soft. "Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should see a doctor if you're not." There was genuine concern in his tone. Despite my lingering embarrassment, I felt a flicker of warmth. Perhaps Lucas was just trying to care for me in his own awkward way, like a younger brother looking out for his sister. "I'm fine, Lucas," I reassured him with a forced smile. "It's just a small change. I'll keep an eye on it. But thank you for worrying." Just then, a strong gust of wind blew through the laundry room window, snatching the underwear from my hands. It fell to the floor, and Lucas instinctively bent down to pick it up. Then it happened. In an instant, Lucas lifted the underwear to his nose and sniffed it. I stood frozen in place, utterly horrified. It felt like the blood in my veins had turned to ice. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The image of Lucas sniffing my underwear unfolded in slow motion, etching itself into my mind like a nightmare. Disgust, fury, and an overwhelming sense of violation surged through me. "Lucas!" I roared, my voice trembling with rage. You're disgusting!" Lucas flinched, dropping the underwear immediately. His face went pale as he stammered, "Miss Lily, I didn't mean to. I just—" "Shut up!" I cut him off, glaring at him with a fury I couldn't contain. "I don't want to hear any excuses. Go to your room now." Hanging his head in shame, Lucas shuffled upstairs without another word. I stood there, trembling from head to toe, staring at the underwear lying on the floor. The trust I had in Lucas was shattered, replaced by a deep sense of disgust and doubt. I had no idea how I could face him after this. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of Lucas sniffing the underwear haunted me, filling me with anger and revulsion. I wanted to tell Michael, but fear held me back. I was terrified he'd lash out at Lucas, making him resent me even more, which would surely fracture the family beyond repair. I also feared Michael might misunderstand the situation between me and Lucas. The silence weighed heavily on me, growing more oppressive with each passing moment. I felt increasingly anxious and exhausted. If only I hadn't asked Lucas to handle the laundry, none of this would have happened. Days passed, and Lucas continued to avoid me. At family meals, he barely touched his food before retreating quietly to his room. His room, once filled with the sounds of clicking keyboards, music, or video games, had become eerily silent. The tension in the house grew so thick that even Michael began to notice. One evening, as we cleared the dinner table, he asked with a concerned look, "Is something going on with Lucas?" I hesitated, caught off guard by his question. The truth sat on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed it back. After a brief pause, I forced a reassuring tone. "He's probably just going through some growing pains, teenage mood swings. I'll talk to him, see if there's anything bothering him. Don't worry, I'll handle it." I mustered a gentle smile, but a sense of unease gnawed at me from within. I began to realize that I shared responsibility for the strained atmosphere. Yes, Lucas had shocked and upset me, but my reaction that day had likely driven a wedge deeper between us. I hadn't given him a chance to explain himself or tried to understand what lay behind his actions. The initial awkwardness and irritation I felt had slowly been replaced by something else: guilt. I couldn't ignore the fact that my silence had only widened the gulf between us. Lucas was young, and perhaps he, too, was struggling with how to mend the situation. I can't let this go on, I thought to myself, staring at the ceiling as if seeking answers from above. Tomorrow, I resolved, I would talk to Lucas. I needed to hear his explanation and clear up any misunderstandings, not just for my sake, but for the sake of our family. The next afternoon, I stood outside Lucas's door, hesitating. The closed door felt like a physical barrier between us, making the distance between us seem far greater than it truly was. Taking a deep breath, I knocked gently. "Lucas, can I come in?" I asked, keeping my tone soft to avoid adding pressure. There was silence for a few seconds, followed by the sound of slow footsteps. The door creaked open, and Lucas appeared, his face pale, and his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and defensiveness. "What is it, Lily?" he asked, his voice low and dry. "We need to talk," I replied, fighting off my nervousness. "I think we need to clear the air." Lucas hesitated briefly but stepped aside to let me in. His room was surprisingly tidy, perhaps because he had spent time cleaning instead of gaming or listening to music as usual. I sat on the chair by his desk while Lucas stood near his bed, avoiding eye contact. The air felt heavy, as though both of us were waiting for the other to speak first. "Lucas," I began, speaking slowly. "I know these past few days have been uncomfortable for you. They have been for me too, but we can't keep ignoring this." He nodded slightly but remained silent. I could see he was grappling internally, trying to find the right words. "That day," I continued, feeling my cheeks flush as I brought it up. "I know I overreacted, but I want to hear from you, Lucas. Maybe I didn't give you the chance to explain." Lucas lifted his head, his eyes filled with a mix of worry and regret. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think you'd misunderstand me like that." I waited, giving him space to elaborate. He lowered his head, his hands fidgeting nervously. "That day," he finally said, I smelled something off on your underwear. It was metallic, like blood. I thought it might be serious, like something about your health. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how. His words caught me off guard. The embarrassment, anger, and shame I had been carrying began to dissolve, replaced by surprise. I hadn't realized that Lucas's concern stemmed from something as earnest as worry for my health. I hadn't given him a chance to explain. He was just a young man, and his awkwardness didn't deserve to drive a wedge between us. I sighed, feeling my tension ease. I understand now, Lucas. And I'm sorry for overreacting. I shouldn't have assumed the worst about you. Lucas looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Really? You're not mad at me anymore? I smiled, standing to place a hand gently on his shoulder. I'm not mad, Lucas. But let's make sure things like this don't come between us again. We're family. He nodded, his expression softening, as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. That evening, Lucas joined Michael and me for dinner. The tension at the table had lifted. Michael talked about his work projects, and Lucas even chimed in on some of his father's stories. I felt as though our little family had regained its harmony. As we cleared the table, Lucas surprised me by saying, "Thanks for talking to me today, Lily. I really appreciate it. And if you ever need someone to go with you to the doctor, just let me know," he added. His words took me aback, but also filled me with warmth. Gradually, the cracks in my relationship with Lucas began to heal. I realized that even small misunderstandings could create large divides if left unresolved. But with sincerity and openness, even the most delicate family bonds could be mended. The next day, as I was preparing dinner, Lucas walked into the kitchen. Gone was the awkwardness and avoidance I had grown used to. Instead, he seemed more at ease. His face lit up with a faint smile, and his relaxed demeanor made the positive shift in our relationship almost palpable. "Lily, is there anything I can help with?" Lucas asked in a calm, genuine tone, his hands already poised to assist. I turned to him, momentarily surprised by his initiative. "If you'd like, you can help me chop some vegetables," I said, a smile spreading across my face. It had been so long since I'd seen Lucas willingly take part in such small tasks. Lucas picked up a knife and began slicing the vegetables with surprising ease. "You know, when I was younger, Dad used to tell me how great your cooking was. But back then, I never thought I'd actually be here, helping you like this." I laughed, a warm, joyful feeling filling the small kitchen. "And now that you are, what do you think?" "I think Dad was right," Lucas replied, his eyes reflecting sincerity. Our conversation flowed naturally, as though the barriers that once stood between us had dissolved entirely. But then, in a quiet moment, Lucas suddenly paused. He set the knife down and turned to face me. "Lily, there's something I've been wanting to say for a while." "What is it, Lucas?" I asked gently, my curiosity piqued by his serious tone. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine with a focus and earnestness that felt almost palpable. "You're truly beautiful, not just on the outside, but in the way you care for Dad, for me. I really admire you." His words caught me off guard for a brief moment. My heart seemed to slow, taking in every syllable Lucas spoke. But this time, there was no trace of awkwardness or hesitation in his gaze. It was filled only with gratitude and pure appreciation, like a son expressing his heartfelt respect for his stepmother. I smiled, stepping closer and placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Lucas. That means so much to me, and I want you to know that I'm very proud of you." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "I think I'm really lucky to have you as part of our family." That evening, after Lucas had gone up to his room, I stayed in the living room, feeling a deep sense of relief, as though a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. The misunderstandings and walls that had once stood between Lucas and me were gradually fading away. He was no longer the quiet, confused boy I'd met when I first joined this family. He was becoming someone mature, someone capable of expressing his feelings and facing the challenges in his life. I reminded myself that, even as a stepmother, I could still be someone Lucas could trust. That was my responsibility, and my greatest source of pride in being part of this family. Everything in the house started to shift when Michael announced he would be traveling for work for an entire month. The news left me feeling a little empty. It had been a long time since we'd spent meaningful time together, and the thought of the coming weeks without Michael filled me with a quiet sense of loneliness. During Michael's absence, Lucas's demeanor began to change. Instead of being reserved and avoiding me like before, he became more friendly and attentive. We started spending more time together, and our stepmother-stepson relationship began evolving in ways I hadn't anticipated. One morning, as I was tidying up the kitchen, Lucas walked in with a radiant smile. "Do you have plans today, Lily? If not, I'd like to take you out for lunch," he said casually. I was momentarily surprised by the invitation. Lunch? The shy young man I used to know is now asking his stepmom out to lunch? I teased with a chuckle. Lucas laughed along. "You've worked so hard taking care of this family. You deserve a break. With Dad gone, I'll take his place as your companion for now." I couldn't say no. We went to a small cafe in the city center. Lucas pulled out a chair for me, his gesture so gentlemanly it made me laugh. That lunch was just the beginning of what became a string of enjoyable days. Lucas started suggesting we take walks in the park, shop for groceries together, and even once accompanied me to a gynecological appointment, a scenario I never imagined sharing with my stepson. While waiting outside the doctor's office, I noticed a few curious glances from people nearby. An older woman looked at Lucas, then at me, her eyes full of meaning. "What a sweet young couple," she whispered to her companion. I heard her and couldn't help but laugh, but Lucas turned away, his ears turning red with embarrassment. "They're wrong," he muttered softly, unable to hide his awkwardness. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's fine, Lucas. Let them think what they want. Let's head home." Lucas smiled, his expression softening. In that moment, I realized that this closeness between us didn't feel awkward as I once feared. Instead, it brought a sense of comfort and warmth, something I hadn't felt in a long time in my marriage with Michael. One afternoon, Lucas suggested we bake something together. The kitchen filled with laughter as we fumbled with flour and baking molds. Lucas, adorably clumsy, managed to spill an entire bag of flour all over me. I shrieked but couldn't stop laughing at his sheepish expression. "You're such a klutz, Lucas," I said, brushing flour off my dress, tears of laughter streaming down my face. "But you're laughing, aren't you?" Lucas shot back, his eyes sparkling mischievously. I paused, realizing just how much I had been laughing these past few days. These moments, as simple as they were, brought me a kind of happiness I hadn't experienced with Michael. The awkward distance between Lucas and me was gone. I no longer saw him merely as my husband's son, but as a true companion. We could share stories, laugh together, and even enjoy quiet moments in each other's company without any tension or pressure. One evening during dinner, Lucas began sharing stories from his childhood, tales about his old elementary school, the mischievous moments that got him into trouble with his mother, and most poignantly, memories of the late mother he dearly loved. His voice was soft and deliberate, his gaze distant as he spoke of her. "I miss Mom so much, Lily," he said, his tone laced with sadness. "She always understood me, even when I didn't have the words to explain. But she left too soon." I sat quietly, my chest tightening at his words. Lucas wasn't just the reserved young man who often shut himself away in his room. He was a sensitive soul, yearning for connection. "I'm certain your mom is so proud of you, Lucas," I said gently. "She's watching over you, always." Lucas smiled faintly, his eyes lingering on me longer than usual. "Thank you, Lily. You remind me of her. Strong, kind, and always knowing how to listen." A wave of unidentifiable emotion washed over me, but I quickly brushed it aside, focusing on maintaining my role as his stepmother. Another evening, after dinner, Lucas surprised me by clearing the table. As he finished, he turned to me, hesitation flickering in his expression, as though he was mustering the courage to say something important. "Lily," he began, his voice steady but unsure, "are you happy with Dad?" I froze, a sudden chill sweeping through me. His question caught me off guard. Too unexpected, too personal. Yet his gaze carried no malice. It was filled with curiosity and sincerity, as though he genuinely wanted to understand my relationship with Michael. "Why do you ask that, Lucas?" I replied, keeping my voice calm despite the unease stirring inside me. "I don't know," he said, pausing briefly. "You're such a strong, intelligent woman. I just wonder, is Dad enough to make you happy?" I smiled faintly, but even I could feel the uneasiness behind it. "Happiness is a complex thing, Lucas. But I believe everyone has their own way of finding it. Your dad and I do too." Lucas nodded, though his eyes seemed to hold back something unsaid. After Lucas went upstairs, I remained in the living room, the weight of his questions settling heavily in my chest. His words didn't just surprise me. They forced me to confront thoughts I had been avoiding for some time. Was I truly happy with Michael? Or was I simply convincing myself that this life was what I wanted? The house fell silent, yet within me, a storm of emotions churned. I knew that my relationship with Lucas had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I had to find a way to prevent it from crossing a line that neither of us could undo. As the day of Michael's return approached, an unexpected emptiness began to seep into my heart. It came suddenly, like a chilling gust of wind, leaving me breathless. Sitting in the living room, I stared at the wall clock, the ticking of each second a reminder that my time alone with Lucas was drawing to a close. I sighed, my gaze drifting aimlessly to the window. Outside, late autumn was in full display, with fiery red leaves cascading gracefully to the ground, like a dance of farewells. It hit me then. These past weeks with Lucas weren't just fleeting moments of joy. They had become an essential part of my life, a part I wasn't ready to let go. Why was I feeling this sense of loss? I should have been happy that Michael was coming back, that our family would soon be reunited. Yet, instead of excitement, I felt fear, a deep fear that Michael's presence might shatter the delicate harmony Lucas and I had built during his absence. That evening, as I sat on the sofa with a cold cup of tea in my hands, Lucas walked into the living room. "Lily, you don't seem happy," he said, sitting down beside me. I was startled by his directness. "No, it's nothing," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "I'm just thinking about some things." But in that moment, I realized something had shifted within me. "Lily, what are you thinking?" I questioned myself, my thoughts a tangled mess. I couldn't allow fleeting emotions to take over. Lucas was Michael's son, his stepson. While nothing improper had happened between us, this bond had grown beyond the boundaries I had once firmly set. I stood up, needing space to clear my mind, and stepped out onto the balcony to breathe in the crisp evening air. The autumn wind was sharp and cold, brushing against my hair and bringing clarity to my swirling thoughts. I closed my eyes, willing myself to untangle the chaos in my heart. This was a moment of weakness, a temporary confusion. I needed to stop before things went too far. When I returned to the living room, Lucas was still seated, his eyes filled with concern. I smiled and sat down beside him. "Lucas, your dad's coming home tomorrow. We should plan a really nice dinner to welcome him back, don't you think?" He nodded enthusiastically, his smile as bright as morning sunlight. "Of course, Lily. I'll do everything I can to help." Looking at him, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Perhaps what I needed was to cherish the beautiful memories we had created, while also establishing clear boundaries so no one would get hurt. I was Michael's wife, and I had to remain steadfast in that role. Lucas was a young man who had brought me moments of happiness during a fleeting period, but that was all it could ever be. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, preparing lunch and setting the table with extra care as a way to welcome Michael home after his long business trip. Lucas was also up early, helping me with the preparations. Watching him work alongside me, I felt an unexpected sense of relief and peace settle over me. The front door opened, and Michael stepped inside, his face lit up with a broad smile. "I'm home," he announced, his voice filling the house with warmth. He brought out gifts he had carefully chosen for both Lucas and me, his thoughtfulness evident in every detail. During lunch, the three of us gathered around the table. Michael shared stories of his successful projects and the new partners he had met. Lucas listened intently, occasionally asking questions that seemed to energize Michael even more. I sat quietly, watching the two most important men in my life converse, and for the first time in weeks, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I realized that the time Michael was away had allowed Lucas and me to grow closer. The walls that had once separated us were gone, replaced by a natural connection. Lucas was no longer the reserved young man who avoided my presence. He had become an integral part of this family, seamlessly and wholeheartedly. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes moving between Lucas and me. He smiled softly, as if recognizing something significant. "I can tell you two have grown closer. That's wonderful. Lucas, thank you for helping Lily while I was away." Lucas nodded slightly, his grin bright. "I just did what I should, Dad." Michael turned to me, his gaze filled with gratitude. "Lily, thank you. I know it's not always easy with Lucas, but you've helped him open up so much. Seeing our family like this, well, it's everything I could have hoped for." I returned his smile, feeling the warmth of his words sink into my heart. Despite the confusion and misplaced emotions I had grappled with, I realized how lucky I was to have a husband like Michael and a stepson like Lucas. The misunderstandings and awkwardness of the past now felt like distant memories, replaced by the completeness and happiness of our family. As we cleaned up after dinner, Lucas stood beside me, helping me dry the dishes. "Lily, are you happy today?" he asked, his eyes filled with genuine concern. I smiled and nodded. "I am, Lucas. Thank you for always being here for me." I smiled outwardly, but inside, my emotions churned. I wasn't entirely sure if I was truly happy with Michael's return. The days ahead, I knew, would bring more challenges. But with Michael and Lucas by my side, I felt certain we could face them together. This family, as imperfect as it might be, had become the place where I truly belonged. In the days following Michael's return, life seemed to slip back into its usual rhythm. The three of us shared meals together, watched light-hearted TV shows, and played board games on weekend evenings. Yet inside me, something unfamiliar was stirring, a vague, nameless feeling that I couldn't quite ignore. One evening, while preparing dinner in the kitchen, Michael walked in with his phone pressed to his ear. He was immersed in a work call, barely nodding in my direction before stepping out again to continue his conversation. My gaze unintentionally drifted toward the living room, where Lucas sat on the couch, intently fiddling with an old gaming console. I didn't know why I paused to watch him. Maybe it was something in his expression, patient and focused, yet effortlessly at ease, that struck a chord in me. It was warm. A warmth I hadn't felt in a long time, at least not with Michael. "No, Amelia, don't go there," I told myself, shaking my head as if to banish the thought. But the thoughts persisted, circling back like waves lapping at the shore. Sometimes, when I sat beside Michael, I noticed how the closeness we once shared had faded over time. My marriage to him had always felt like the practical, safe choice, but perhaps that same sense of security had drained some of its vibrancy. Michael was a dependable husband, but his enthusiasm and passion now seemed reserved solely for his work. Our conversations were increasingly transactional, about tasks, bills, and family plans. I began to feel like a role player in my own life, rather than someone truly living it. In contrast, Lucas's presence felt lighter freer. During quiet evenings, he would sit and share childhood memories, or we'd do small tasks together like clearing the table. Somehow, he always managed to make me laugh. His youth, his unbridled energy, and the way he genuinely cared about the little things reminded me of who I used to be. An Amelia who had been lively, hopeful, and unburdened before marriage. I started to notice myself comparing Michael and Lucas. It wasn't a comparison I welcomed. It left me unsettled, as if I were caught between two worlds I couldn't reconcile. Lucas is just a young man, I told myself whenever such thoughts surfaced. You shouldn't think of him this way. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I felt guilty toward Michael, yet I couldn't deny that Lucas's presence had awakened something in me. Something I thought I had buried long ago. Late one night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. A soft yellow light illuminated the open book in my lap, but I couldn't focus on a single word. My mind swirled with questions I didn't dare answer. "Lily, what are you doing?" I whispered to myself, but the silence offered no reply. The pale moonlight streaming through the window carried a strange mix of solace and isolation. I knew I needed to untangle my emotions, to figure out what was happening inside me. But did I have the courage to face the truth of what was unfolding? And could I find a way to restore balance to these relationships before everything spiraled out of control? On rainy nights like these, the house felt especially empty, with the sound of Michael's absence echoing through every corner. The steady rhythm of raindrops against the windows filled the air, a constant, monotonous beat that underscored my loneliness. Michael had called earlier, explaining he wouldn't be home due to the heavy rain. I had ended the call feeling hollow, a void settling in the pit of my stomach. Lucas appeared from the second-floor balcony, his broad shoulders slightly hunched and his dark hair dripping wet. He held a towel in one hand, still damp from the storm outside. "I just checked the balcony door," he said, his voice deep, resonating in the stillness of the house. "The rain's coming down hard. I was worried water might seep in." I turned to look at him, my eyes catching on the raindrops trailing down his face. A strange sensation stirred within me, a mixture of gratitude and something more unfamiliar, something I couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Lucas," I said softly. "You really are so thoughtful." I stepped closer and took the towel from his hand. "Sit down," I offered gently, motioning to the couch. "Let me dry your hair." Lucas hesitated but then settled onto the sofa, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes followed me as I moved closer, quiet but filled with a kind of warmth I wasn't prepared for. I began drying his hair, my hands moving carefully through the damp strands. The soft fabric of the towel brushed against his scalp, and I could feel the coolness of the rain lingering in his hair. Each motion was deliberate, almost reverent, as if the moment itself might shatter if I moved too quickly. Lucas tilted his head upward, his gaze meeting mine. Time seemed to stop. His eyes, dark and unending, like the night outside, held me in place, drawing me in like a tide pulling toward the depths of an unknown ocean. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, the rhythm matching the relentless patter of rain on the roof. Lucas leaned closer, and his breath brushed against my cheek, warm and steady. Before I could react, his lips grazed mine, tentative, hesitant, yet enough to render my thoughts a blur. I froze, the weight of the moment crashing over me. Lucas pulled back slightly, his eyes filled with an intensity I had never seen before. "Lily," he whispered, his voice rough and barely audible over the rain. "Your lips, they're so beautiful." I couldn't help myself. My breath caught, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. My entire body felt paralyzed, yet every nerve was alive, buzzing with an uncontainable energy. Lucas leaned in again, this time pressing his lips to mine with more certainty. The kiss was fierce, consuming, breaking down every wall I had carefully constructed. It was as though we had surrendered to an undeniable force, something neither of us could fight anymore. I found myself responding, my hands moving to his shoulders as I gave in to the flood of emotions washing over me. My mind spun, unable to separate what was right from what was happening. All I knew was the warmth of Lucas's lips, the way they moved against mine, igniting something inside me that I had buried for far too long. The kiss deepened, filled with a passion that erased all the lines I thought I could never cross. It wasn't just a kiss, it was an escape, a release, a silent confession of everything we'd both been holding back. I felt alive, unrestrained, as though I was finally letting myself feel something real, something raw. Lucas's hand cupped my cheek, his touch gentle yet grounding, as if anchoring me to this moment. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my palm, wild and frantic, mirroring my own. The rain outside became a symphony, its rhythm melding with the chaotic, undeniable pull between us. When we finally broke apart, our faces lingered close, our breaths mingling in the charged air. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was deafening, filled with unspoken truths and unvoiced fears. His eyes searched mine, and I knew he was as lost in this moment as I was. The rain continued to fall, its steady cadence a backdrop to the storm brewing within me. I realized then that I wasn't just grappling with Lucas. I was grappling with myself, with desires and vulnerabilities I had long ignored. That night, everything changed. The boundaries I had clung to, reason, morality, responsibility, were shattered, swept away by the torrent of emotions we could no longer contain. Lucas and I found solace in each other, a fleeting warmth against the cold, unyielding rain. But I knew, as we held on to one another, that there was no going back. The line we had crossed was irrevocable, and our lives would never be the same again. Since that stormy night, I was no longer myself. Every time I faced Michael, my heart felt as if it were being squeezed. His sincere eyes only deepened my guilt. Michael assumed I was upset with him for not coming home that rainy night. He tried to console me, but his gentle words pierced my conscience like needles, sharp and unrelenting. "I'm sorry, Lily. I didn't mean to make you worry. Next time, I'll try not to let something like that upset you again." I could only nod, avoiding his gaze. Inside, guilt consumed me. I had done something unforgivable, a mistake so overwhelming that even thinking about it left me breathless. With Lucas, it was no easier. I didn't know how to face him. Every time his eyes sought mine, I would intentionally look away. This avoidance frustrated him. He wasn't unaware of the gravity of his mistake, but the impulsiveness of youth kept him from fully grasping its depth. He wanted to resolve everything, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Each stolen glance from Lucas reminded me of my failing, and every kind word from Michael felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I was caught between two worlds, one of unbearable guilt and the other of unspoken emotions, and I didn't know how to escape either. One evening, after Michael had gone upstairs, Lucas approached me while I was clearing the dinner table. As I stacked the dishes, he suddenly grabbed my hand. His voice was low and steady. "Why are you avoiding me, Lily? You don't talk to me anymore. You don't even look at me. Why?" I froze but didn't respond. I tried to pull my hand away, but Lucas didn't let go. "Lucas, don't do this," I whispered, struggling to maintain my composure. We tugged back and forth, and in an instant, a plate slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor. The sharp sound of breaking porcelain shattered the silence of the house. Michael came rushing down from upstairs, his face full of concern. "What happened?" I quickly knelt down to pick up the pieces, trying to appear calm. "It's nothing. I just accidentally dropped it," I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. Michael glanced between me and Lucas, his expression tinged with suspicion, but he only sighed and helped us clean up. That weekend, I went to church. Kneeling before the cross, my heart overflowed with guilt. Dear God, I have sinned. Please help me find my way back to myself. I want to forget everything and live wholeheartedly with the husband I chose. My prayers felt like a confession, as if I were admitting my mistakes to myself as much as to God. But could they erase what I had done? I wasn't sure. In the days that followed, I avoided Lucas entirely. I didn't speak to him, didn't meet his eyes. My silence only seemed to make him more restless. One morning, not long after Michael had left for work, Lucas suddenly appeared behind me and wrapped his arms around me. "Lily, why are you doing this? You ignore me, you don't talk to me. I can't take it anymore." I startled, trying to free myself from his grip. "Lucas, stop this. We can't go on like this. I was wrong, and you were wrong. This relationship is wrong." Lucas turned me to face him, his eyes filled with pain. "But I don't care, Lily. I can't stop thinking about you. Say whatever you want, but don't ignore me. Don't make me feel like I don't exist." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Lucas, please. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste your emotions on someone like me. This can't lead to anything good." Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes. Then, "Let me hug you one last time, and we'll end this." I had no strength left to refuse. Lucas gently pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly as if he wanted to etch this moment into his memory forever. I felt his tears dampen my shoulder as he whispered softly, "I'm sorry." He leaned down and pressed a tender but deeply emotional kiss to my lips. I stood there, unmoving, neither resisting nor responding. It was our final kiss, a silent goodbye to a relationship that never should have been. A few days later, during dinner, Lucas spoke unexpectedly. "Dad, Lily, I've decided to move out. I think it'll be better for my studies and my independence." Michael smiled, patting his son on the shoulder. "That's great, Lucas. I've always wanted you to become more independent. If you need anything, just let me know." I didn't say a word, only bowed my head, feeling empty inside. I knew this was the best choice for both of us. But why did it feel like I was losing something I could never get back? The day Lucas left, I stood at the doorway, watching his figure fade into the distance at the end of the street. I told myself I would bury everything deep within me, never letting it interfere with Michael's life, the man I chose to be my husband. I was wrong, I whispered to myself. But the most important thing now is not letting one mistake lead to another. Michael doesn't deserve to bear the weight of what I've done. Life is never easy. I've learned that loneliness and fleeting emotions can push us toward poor choices, but the key is knowing when to stop, when to recognize the true value of those who love us. Michael is the man I chose to spend my life with, and I owe him nothing less than complete honesty and devotion. Lucas is a young man, and I hope he finds genuine happiness in his future. If there's one thing I could share with anyone, it's this: be mindful of fleeting feelings. Don't let moments of weakness destroy the good things you've worked so hard to build. As her story comes to a close, Lily stands at the threshold of self-reflection, clinging to the hope that time will heal all wounds.